politicians from all the main parties will be answering your questions on the issues that matter to you. And right now, let me introduce today's guest, Michael Gove, who's speaking for the Conservative Party. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 or you can tweet at LBC. And of course, we're on Facebook Live and you can watch us on the LBC website. Michael, very good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian.
This is all about the listeners. Want to get your calls on as soon as possible. 0345 6060 973. Let's go to Davin, who's in Milton Keynes. Hello, Davin.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, what's your question to Michael?
Yeah, my question is, listening to the kind of endless rhetoric about Theresa May being strong and stable, and any other vote would be for a coalition of chaos. Does that not sort of show a kind of disrespect for the voter? I mean, a kind of a lack of respect for their intelligence to be able to consider things on policies rather than personalities?
No, I don't think so. I think one of the things that all modern politicians have to do is to be able to compress their message into memorable and pithy phrases. Because to be fair to all of us, we lead busy lives and there are so many calls on all of our time. And politics, therefore, when politicians are attempting to catch our attention, does need to be presented in a professional way. And that means a degree of focus and discipline in making the case. Of course, however, there are plenty of opportunities for those of us who want not just a sort of a shorter engagement with the political argument, but a longer engagement with the debate. To get that longer engagement, whether it's half an hour election call on LBC or whether it's the Question Time programme that all the party leaders have agreed to. There are opportunities to put the leaders through their paces, as well as opportunities to be reminded of what the pith and essence of their pitch might be.
Davin?
Well, I mean, do you not think that when she says any other vote for me will be for a coalition of chaos, do you think that's a professional message? I mean, as you said, it doesn't sound very professional to me. It sounds like a sort of direct attack against any other vote.
Well, I think it sums up the choice at this election. There are two alternative prime ministers, and ultimately, of course, while you vote for your own particular representative in your own constituency, you also vote for who you think is best equipped to lead the country. And the choice is either Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn. And we know, just because of the arithmetic, because of what's happening in Scotland with the Scottish National Party, that it's extremely unlikely that Jeremy Corbyn will get a majority. So therefore, the overwhelming likelihood is that if he does emerge at the end of this election as Prime Minister, it will be because he's propped up by the SNP, Liberal Democrats and others. And I think that coalition of chaos perfectly encapsulates what would follow.
What was the 2010 to 2015 coalition, a coalition of chaos?
No.
Apart from you and Nick Clegg, obviously.
My great mate, Nick. One of the things about that particular coalition is that, of course, it was unexpected, but it was surprisingly harmonious because so much of the then Liberal Democrat programme and the Conservative programme coincided.
But why should a SNP, Labour, Lib Dem, Green coalition be any worse? Because if you look at their party platforms, there are overlaps on all of them.
Well, there are areas at each edge where they overlap, but they want fundamentally different things. So the Labour Party is still just a unionist party. The SNP want to break up the United Kingdom. The Labour Party, as we heard last week from Emily Thornberry, wants to preserve the current electoral system. The Liberal Democrats want to transform it. A position of each of those parties on Brexit is different. So the SNP wants Scotland, so they say, outside the EU but in the single market. The Liberal Democrats want a second referendum. And Jeremy Corbyn, well, nobody knows what Jeremy Corbyn thinks on this matter because he was asked the question, I think, 7 times this morning, whether or not if there were a Labour-led government, we'd be in or out of the EU. I think the fundamental differences and divergences between all of those parties make the differences and divergences between Nick Clegg and David Cameron seem infinitesimal.
OK, right, let's go to some more questions. You can, of course, watch us on Facebook Live. Just go to the LBC Facebook page and it's all there. Or you can watch on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk. 2 spaces free on switchboard 0345 6060 973. Thomas is in Worthing. Hi, Thomas.
Good afternoon. With the Conservative Party pledge to bring immigration down to tens of thousands failed and the unskilled jobs market already saturated with predominantly EU immigration, will the Conservatives prioritise skilled global migration over unskilled EU migration, and how would the Conservatives make that happen and hold to their recycled pledge?
Well, the short answer is, I think, yes. One of the things about leaving the European Union is that we can take back control of our borders and our laws. And that means two things. We can both control the number of people who might come from EU countries. At the moment, as you say, they've got an unfettered right of free movement. But it also means that we can shape our laws so that we can have a migration system that continues to attract people who've got the skills that our economy might need, continues to allow people who are suffering from persecution to come here in the right circumstances, but also means there's democratic control of the numbers.
Right, but you didn't control rest of the world migration previous to now, so why should we believe you now?
Because outside the European Union, we have the capacity to change laws to assert democratic control of those numbers. And in Theresa May, you have someone who, over the course of the last 6 years, has made crystal clear her belief, not least in a speech at the Conservative Party conference a couple of years ago, which was deemed controversial, but was, in fact, very brave, in which she spelled out the need to bring immigration to sustainable levels. One of the things...
Hang on a minute. She was Home Secretary for 6 years. As Thomas says, immigration from outside the EU in the last 12 months was 185,000. It was within her control to limit it to tens of thousands, and she did not.
Without wanting to tell too many tales out of school, during the 2010-2015 government, as we were discussing, we were in coalition. There were a number of things that Theresa put forward which the Liberal Democrats either objected to or diluted. Now, some people listening might say, hooray for them, I'm going to vote Lib Dem, they're the party of greater migration, and indeed they are. So you pay your money and you take your choice.
Well, but 2015 to 2017, rest of the world migration stayed high. And correct me if I'm wrong, the Liberal Democrats weren't in coalition with the Conservatives.
They absolutely were not. But we were also still constrained in a way that we won't be outside the European Union to be able to change our laws and to change policies in a way which means that we can, if we wish, have an immigration policy which won't be struck down by the European Court of Justice, but which will be ours, sovereign, and in our interests.
That's got nothing to do with the rest of the world migration. So that's the point.
Well, one of the things is that our rules on all sorts of questions are trumped by EU law, and the Prime Minister has made it clear that she wants to bring migration down to a sustainable level. It's perfectly possible to do so. You have developed economies like Japan, which have migration levels much smaller than our own. So, of course, I think it's a good thing to have healthy numbers, but through the period from 1979 to 1997, we had migration in the tens of thousands. Our economy was growing under a Conservative government.
We have a very different economy now, though. We have a globalised economy now. Do you not accept that most of the people who come here because they have jobs to come to, and because we need them to come here to do the jobs that British people, for whatever reason, won't do?
No, I don't accept that. I certainly think that the overwhelming majority of people who do come here with the best of intentions, want to work and make a contribution. However, there are a significant number of people in this country who deserve better training, better skills, and new opportunities. And I think one of the lazy comments that some have uttered in the past is that there are people in this country who don't want to work, who won't accept particular jobs. I think it's very often the case that there are failures. And as a former education secretary, I should take responsibility for some of those failures to adequately train young people in this country to take advantage of the opportunities that exist.
You've preempted the next call, but before we go to the next call, can you seriously look at me eye to eye and say, I believe that by the next election, immigration will be in the tens of thousands?
Yes, because Theresa May is someone who, once she sets her mind on a course, doesn't deviate.
Well, he is looking me in the eye, and if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can tell that. It's just I find it inconceivable.
It is no hardship to look at Ian in his eyes.
Thank you very much.
His rich, deep hazel brown eyes are hypnotic.
Enough. I think that there are many of your colleagues who don't believe this and think that it would be much better to have a vaguer pledge saying we aspire to get to this, but we can't make it a rigid target for 2022 because it's unachievable.
I think there are all sorts of people who outside the Conservative Party who will mount their own critique. Like any other politician, listen with interest. But it's certainly the case that you can have, as we had during the time when the Conservatives were last in power in a majority government up to 97, immigration in the tens of thousands.
OK, let's move on. Jan is in Reigate. Jan, you're not a fan of Michael Gove's education policies, I see.
Not at all. I just wondered how aware you were of the disastrous effects of these changes that have come in with this year's O-levels, the English and Maths papers, with no gentle phase-in, straight in from sort of, maybe they did need sort of making more difficult, but it should have been a gentle phase-in. They've gone from sort of A to Z in one step, with no gentle phase-in, hardly any specimen papers available. Most of the kids doing this didn't know what to expect. I mean, I have twin granddaughters taking them this year, and they're reasonably bright kids. Hopefully they'll get through okay, but they came out of the maths exam, the maths mock exam, saying it's like nothing they've ever seen before. They've spent 5 years working their socks off to get to this stage, and with no, I mean, anyone making drastic changes with over 1 year can have had no proper experience of what it's like for kids in that stage of their life.
Well, I do sympathise, Jan. My own children are at secondary school, and they're just a little bit younger.
Taking it this year, oh yeah, but then they'll have the few years to get used to it, won't they?
Well, they're 14 and 12, so they're you know, my daughter's in just about to move into the year when she will be preparing for these GCSEs. But
yeah, but so she will have 3 years before she takes hers.
Yes.
Whereas these girls, the kids taking it this year have had, well, no preparation really, because no one knew what they were preparing for.
Well, I'd say two things. The first is that it's always the case that whenever examinations change, that there are concerns when the change is made, and then afterwards, normally, relief or pleasure that the change has been made. And part of the problem that we've had is that
I'm not talking about there being a need for a change. What I'm talking about is the inordinate speed that was brought in with these.
And that's a fair point, isn't it?
No, I don't think it is, because I was Education Secretary between 2010 and 2014. I said right at the very beginning that we needed to have a higher level of ambition in our examinations. And
that's not a bad point. That's not the point I'm making. What I'm saying is they were not given enough time.
Well,
teachers and children.
I think
so this year's and children at private school were able to take the old papers this year, interestingly enough, but children at state schools are lumped in with this new exam.
How on earth can that happen?
I'm not quite sure about that. I'd love to know more, Jan, but one thing I would say is that it's 7 years after I arrived at the Department for Education, we now have new GCSEs. I think that 7 years, nobody would say was breakneck speed. I think that there may be individual issues in individual schools in terms of preparation for these new examinations. And of course, I know that ministers will be across that. And as a constituency MP, although I can't mention the constituency myself, I'll be talking to, and have been talking to, teachers and head teachers about these issues. So I'll report back.
Annie is in Carnforth. Annie, what's your question to Michael Gove, please?
Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Gove. I'm disabled, and since 2010, benefit changes for the sick and disabled have meant that hundreds of thousands of disabled people have had their benefits cut or lost them altogether, and 51,000 have lost their Motability cards and are now imprisoned in their homes, unable to go to work or anywhere else. Disabled people didn't cause the banking crisis, but we're suffering disproportionately from the cuts. And this government have made cuts to the richest, like corporation tax, capital gains tax, and to the banking levy, to the bankers who actually caused the banking crash. And yet disabled people have been attacked. Our standard of living has been attacked.
So what's your question, Annie?
Well, how can you justify this?
Well, first of all, Annie, I think anyone would automatically sympathise with you and anyone else who's living with a disability, because I know that the daily challenges that you face are very, very difficult for those of us who are not living with disabilities to imagine and to empathise with. So the first thing I wanted to say is I can completely understand the anger or frustration you or others may have when you find that the support that you hope to have is not there. I would, however, say, with respect to two things, both to benefit changes and to tax changes, when it comes to tax changes, we now get the wealthiest in this country to pay more in tax than ever before. There's a sort of sweet spot when it comes to taxation where you get the level absolutely right and you raise the maximum amount. And my approach to tax is you want to raise the maximum amount, not punish anyone in particular, because you need that money in order to spend it on supporting people like yourself and others. And on the whole question of benefit changes, my understanding is that we've changed things like personal insurance payments to ensure that those who have the greatest need now get the support that they deserve, but your own individual member of parliament, or I was about to say candidate, will, I'm sure, be more than happy to investigate the particular concerns you have, because I do know that the dedicated teams who work at the Department of Work and Pensions want to make sure that those in receipt of PIPs or in other benefits who deserve them get them.
I think Annie's point, and Annie, forgive me for intervening here, but I think Annie's point was essentially what Jeremy Corbyn is saying, that the Tories are the party for the few, his is the party for the many, and on cuts to the disabled, you can kind of see the point she's making.
Well, the one thing I would contest is the principle that people living with disabilities have been targeted for benefit cuts. There have been reductions in the DWP spend, but I know that ministers have been trying very, very hard to ensure that those living with disabilities are not adversely affected by that.
But they are being adversely affected. It's quite clear. I mean, I get phone calls day after day from people telling me how they're affected by it. So you can't say that they aren't. 50,000 people, according to Annie, I've seen that figure elsewhere, have lost their Motability card, which means that they are, as Annie says, imprisoned in their homes.
Well, I'd have to look at each individual case in order to know whether or not the judgment was made appropriately and properly.
But this is a policy that has been implemented, and it is affecting individual people. And you as a politician can't possibly look at 50,000 individual cases, but the policy has affected 50,000 individuals.
Well, I do not know and cannot know in each case whether or not that change is justified. All I do know is that the intention of ministers has been to ensure that those people who are living with disabilities do receive the support, whether that's through a Motability vehicle or through additional payments that they deserve. But of course, nobody wants to see those who are genuinely in need suffering as a result of the mistakes which Annie quite rightly points out were made by people who were working in the City of London, not people in Carnforth.
Annie, quick comeback from you.
Well, actually, disability living allowance, which the Tories had said, well, in fact, David Cameron was on Radio 2 weeks before the 2010 election and said to a disabled person who'd rung up and said they were worried about disability living allowance, if there were going to be any changes, he said, no, we're not going to make any changes to disability living allowance. And when they got in, 4 weeks later, they announced that they were abolishing it and bringing in PIP. And that has been brought in deliberately to cut the number of people on disability living allowance, because PIP is different to disability living allowance. The criteria is much harder.
Okay.
It's much harder to get PIP. So that's how they've managed to cut thousands of people off, and thousands of people have lost their cars.
Annie, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Don't forget, we're on Facebook Live. Go to the LBC Facebook page and you can watch us. And we're on the LBC website streaming live as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to talk to Michael Gove in our election call. Harry's in Staines. Hello, Harry.
Hi, Ian and Michael.
Hi.
Michael, just a question. Don't you think it's a bit ridiculous the way Theresa May won't debate Jeremy Corbyn live on TV? In my eyes, I feel like she's shortchanging the public in a lot of ways and not giving us what we really want, which we want to see an honest Theresa May, not one in a warehouse in Maidenhead surrounded by 10 people. We want to see a genuine future Prime Minister, not one that's avoiding questions.
Well, I should say that Theresa, I think, is going to be appearing on LBC this week.
She is, 7 p.m. on Thursday, and she will be taking questions from LBC listeners.
There you go.
Yeah, but I'm saying
it's not quite the same, though, as doing a head-to-head debate with Jeremy Corbyn, is it? Much as though we're very grateful.
No, quite. But I'd say two things. During the referendum campaign, I did two programmes, one a Question Time style programme and one with Faisal Islam. They were far, far tougher than any debate with any other politician. It's far tougher to face a rigorous interrogator, whether it's Faisal Islam, Ian Dale or David Dimbleby, and then have questions from genuine voters, rather than to have a staged exercise like the debates that we had in 2010. I played a part in helping to prepare David Cameron at that time for those 2010 debates.
Who did you play?
I played David Dimbleby.
A challenging role.
But one of the things is that those debates actually sucked energy and attention
Well, that
out.
was because there were three of them. I think if you have one, and Theresa May is trying to frame this election as essentially a presidential election, sort of her against Jeremy Corbyn. So the electorate, and I think Harry is speaking for the vast majority of the electorate here, they want to see the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition debating. In France, they did it for 4 hours.
Exactly, and head on head, and then you'd get more genuine. I mean, we see it in PMQs, I know half an hour, whatever it is, but it's not. The two strongest candidates should go one-on-one, and we'd see who's really genuine, who's speaking from the heart. The British public aren't fools. We can make a decision for ourselves, and really, she owes it to us.
I take your point, Harry. I don't know how many people share your view. I'm sure a significant number do. I don't know that it's a majority. One thing I do know is that there is no tougher test for a politician than facing a question time style format.
If you had been leader of the Conservative Party and you stood for it, you could have been, I think you'd have done head-to-head debates because you're actually rather good at it. Do you think the Prime Minister's a little bit frit, as Margaret Thatcher once said?
No, I think that, as I said earlier, the toughest thing to do as a politician is to appear in front of a studio audience or to take calls from voters and to defend your position in that way. Compared to that, the staged exchange of barbs and zingers that is a standard leaders' debate is an easier proposition.
OK, let's go to Jackie, who's in Orpington. Hi, Jackie.
Hello, Ian. Quick question for Michael Gove, who I actually love as a politician.
It's going to be a challenging question, then.
Yeah, well, that's the only question. I love Michael Gove. No, not really. Isn't May Prime Minister?
Oh, Jackie, we're going to get you back on a better line because I couldn't really decipher that. It's a terrible line there. Dorian's in Bristol. Hello, Dorian.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Michael. I just wanted to ask, do you feel quite lucky that your party seems to be trusted on the economy and your tax and spending plans, when in reality you tend to always borrow more than Labour over the course of a whole term in office? Because I'm very confused on this, because you always seem to be trusted, but when I actually look at figures, you seem to be spending more.
Well, what generally happens is that the Tories repair the economy, put it into top gear. Then people feel, well, let's hand it over to Labour to take it for a spin. For a couple of years, things are generally okay, and then Labour crashes the car. And then the Tories have to come back, repair it, and make it operate at the top of its game again. And one of the difficulties, therefore, is that when Conservatives come to power, they often inherit a significant slug of debt or a big deficit that they have been left by Labour having crashed the economy. And then during that period when we're in power, we bring that deficit eventually down. And then we find, though I hope not on this occasion, that Labour then take over and we're back to square one.
Fine, you can quote a couple of occasions when that's happened. I could quote you a couple of occasions when it hasn't or has happened the reverse way round. But you must be embarrassed that over the last 7 years, you've more than doubled the national debt. It's now 1.7 trillion. And it's been a Conservative Chancellor in office all that time.
It's inevitably going to be the case that the national debt will increase unless you have a surplus. And one of the things that we said is that we would not expect to get a surplus now until about 2020, perhaps even more so. So the national debt will inevitably increase. The reason why our economy is in deficit is because Labour crashed the economy in 2008, and we're living with the consequences of that.
Well, also that maybe you haven't generated enough economic growth to generate a surplus over the last few years. Well, because we were promised, weren't we, by George Osborne in 2010, that the deficit would be eliminated by 2015.
Britain's had faster economic growth than, I think, almost any other G7 economy, and indeed any other developed economy. And more than that, as we've just been discussing, it's important that we continue to provide money for public services, whether that's education or money going to people living with disabilities. So, of course, you've got to bring the deficit down in a sustainable way, and I think that's what we've done.
I don't really...
Sorry, Dorian.
Sorry. Thanks for taking my point forward, Ian. I don't really... I mean, I don't think... don't know of any time in living memory that the Tories have had a surplus, and I think you're always blaming the previous administration, especially when the last time you say they crashed the economy, that was a worldwide thing. So unless they're holding them responsible for it happening across...
Dorian, look, we've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to move on, if I may. Thank you very much for that. Chris is in Bradford. Hi, Chris.
Hiya. I just wanted to refer back to the comment about the coalition of chaos, and he was referring to the obviously different parties voting against each other in Parliament, and he made a comment about Theresa May's immigration plan, and he said that the Liberal Democrats obviously voted against everything she was trying to do. I just wonder if can we sort of like get away from sort of trying to smear and say coalition of chaos? Can we just sort of like get on and give some honest policies what you're going to follow through with? Because I'm a first time voter, and what I'm hearing so far is just totally putting me off voting for the Tory party.
Well, I'm sorry about that. I think what is a responsibility for me and other Conservative politicians over the course of the next few weeks is to develop some of the themes and policies in greater detail. And I think that the nature of any election will involve people, as well as being positive about their own case, also spelling out what the alternative might involve.
I get that, but you just sort of contradicted yourself when you said that Labour and the SNP and the Liberal Democrats, they're all going to vote against each other, and then you just said that exactly the same, that the Liberal Democrats did it to Theresa May.
Well, I think that is a fair point, but the coalition between 2010 and 2015 was not my preferred outcome, but it worked relatively well. But one of the reasons that it worked well is that you had a mature agreement on certain occasions to find a common point between the two parties' policies. There isn't anything like the same degree of commonality or shared purpose or solidarity between Jeremy Corbyn, the SNP, the Liberal Democrats and any other party upon which he might want to rely in order to keep him in power. But I'm repeating some of the points that I made earlier, and I think you're...
No, don't. If you've said them once, but we haven't got time for
No, exactly, and that's why I think that your challenge is absolutely right. That talking in detail about positive ideas from whichever party and critiquing their benefits and their demerits is the way to go.
You seem to me to be the very antithesis of a Marxist. So are you happy to stand at the next election on a manifesto which contains a quasi-Marxist state intervention pledge, an energy cap? It was Ed Miliband's policy in the last election. You were leading the line in criticising it, and yet you're going to have to defend it this time.
I think it's a legitimate intervention in a broken market. The difference between...
You didn't think that 2 years ago.
I think the difference between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party is the Conservative Party wants to reform broken markets. The Labour Party wants to destroy all markets.
All markets? Isn't that a tad of an exaggeration?
It might be 5% of an exaggeration, but I think if you've got a shadow chancellor who says there's a lot to learn from Das Kapital and who has in the past said that he's a proud and unrepentant Marxist, then I think you've got to... But
Karl Marx would approve of this, wouldn't he? He would approve of a Tory election pledge to intervene in the market to cap energy policy. Now, that's something that you can't possibly ideologically agree with.
I do think that it is right sometimes to intervene in markets, not least when you have, as you do in energy, a big set of companies who are essentially benefiting from having acquired customers post-privatisation. But
that was the case in 2015, wasn't it? What's changed since 2015?
Well, funnily enough, I think there have been a couple of speeches that I've given, since you're asking me, in which I've pointed out some of the problems that we've had with big business and cartels operating either in energy or in the housing market. And I think that all I would say is that while the particular intervention that has been talked about and which Greg Clark talked about this morning, I think is a proportionate one. You need to look at individual markets in different ways and decide, is it right to intervene in this one or not in the other?
You turned on this. You turned on the pension triple lock.
Well, we don't know.
Well, I think we do, don't we?
Well, we don't.
That's not going to be in the manifesto.
We shall see.
You know that as well as I do. The tax pledges as well. How can the electorate trust anything that you say on these issues?
Well, I think the electorate have seen over the course of the last 6 years that the Conservatives have managed to bring down the deficit, get 1.8 million more children in good and outstanding schools, ensure that our economy is one of the fastest growing in the world, and also provide record levels of funding for the NHS, with a significant increase in the number of doctors and nurses working there. There is a record of success which people can look to. More than that, I think it's absolutely right that a new Prime Minister seeking a new mandate should have the ability to recognise some of the concerns that people have developed over the years and address them properly.
Stephen in Chichester has an interesting question. Go ahead, Stephen.
Will the £350 million pledge for the NHS be in the next Tory manifesto?
Well, I'm not writing it, but I certainly put it in there. Just to clarify, The first thing is that it's £350 million which the European Union controls of our money. Actually, it's slightly more than that. That's just a rounding down. Within that, the pledge by myself and other Vote Leave figures was that £100 million of that should go to the NHS when we leave the European Union.
And Boris Johnson, had he become leader of the Conservative Party, would have implemented that.
Absolutely.
But you stopped him from becoming leader, so it's not going to happen. It's down to you.
There are many, many sins that are on my shoulders, but one thing I do argue for is more spending on the NHS. I think it's inevitable that by the time of the next general election, we will be spending more money on health and social care.
So you think that this ought to be in the Tory manifesto? If you were writing it, it would be?
If I were writing it, I would definitely commit to more money for the NHS and social care.
£100 million a week?
As much as possible. Certainly 100 million, yes.
OK. I want a yes-no answer to this. If Theresa May offered you a seat in the cabinet, assuming you're re-elected, would you take it?
Yes.
Well, I wasn't expecting that. Any particular job you'd like? Education, maybe? Go back to your department?
No, I don't anticipate the call coming, to tell you the truth.
Why not?
I think that Theresa quite rightly wanted to have a new team in place, and she wanted to clear out after the referendum. The team are doing very well. I'm very, very happy to do a range of things on the backbenches and to represent my constituency. And so I think it's vanishingly unlikely. One of the reasons I'm in politics is I love being the MP for my constituency, which I cannot name. But another reason is I like being part of the debate around issues that I care about. It was great being a minister. I had my time. Were the time to come again, it would be lovely. But I don't think it's going to.
When she said, Michael, I'm afraid I'm not going to have you in my cabinet, but did she say to you, basically, if you're a good boy, there is the opportunity for redemption?
No. She was incredibly polite and nice, but also clear that she needed a new team. And I think quite right. A Prime Minister should have the opportunity to have the team that he or she wants.
Michael Gove, thank you very much indeed for taking part in our election call. That was LBC's election call. All through the campaign, we'll be hearing from senior figures from the main parties. Thanks to Michael Gove, who was speaking for the Conservative Party. Earlier today, you'll have had the opportunity to hear from Nick Clegg for the Liberal Democrats. I'm sure that's on the LBC website if you missed it. On Wednesday, Sadiq Khan will join my colleague James O'Brien to take your calls on behalf of the Labour Party. Then later on, Paul Nuttall from UKIP will speak to LBC. It's LBC News Time. It's 4:35 and Moira Alderson's here with the headlines.
An 11-year-old girl has been airlifted to hospital after apparently falling from a water ride at the Drayton Manor theme park in Staffordshire. Police say her parents have been informed. UKIP leader Paul Nuttall says Jeremy Corbyn can't be trusted to deliver a good deal on Brexit. The Labour leader says Britain's wealthy elites are trying